I think Sophie was picking up on the cracks in her father's kind of, I don't want to say facade, but like he was just trying to put on a brave face for her. I think she was picking up on a lot of it, and it made her uneasy already in an uneasy time where she's in a new location, like going through puberty. So we don't get to know a lot about Callum's backstory and why he's depressed to some degree, but Sophie gets even less. She really only gets the ever so slight like when you throw a rock and a pond and then it makes a splash. I feel like we got to see the splash. Sophie only got to see, when the rock sinks to the bottom and then a little bit of like dust of like the water, the mud at the bottom of the pond kind of like shakes to the top. That's all Sophie got to see. She got to see just like the residual of his kind of pain.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Dodge this.
What's that thing they do in iCarly? 5, 4, 3, 2. Well, hello. For us, it's a Monday at 10:18 p.m. For you, who knows? But whatever time it is for you, welcome to the Holy Moment podcast. This is a space where we watch films with you and discuss the moments that work, the moments that don't, and the moments that reflect truth in unexpected ways. I'm joined today on this kind of brisk, kind of cold November night by my two co-hosts, Jeffrey and Nathaniel. Who are you guys? Let's see who will answer first.
Hello, I am Jeffrey Nichols. I am an actor based in Tennessee. I really like and maybe slightly sexually attracted to puppets. So do what you want with that information, internet. But again, this was Jeffrey Nichols. Excited to be here on this podcast with you guys.
Hi, I'm Nathaniel Lirio. I'm half Asian. And sorry.
I think the idea of being Asian causes Jeffrey to like uncontrollably laugh. That is
Yeah, I like how Jeffrey was like trying to insult me and called me Asian. I think that just means you're
and then he
racist,
giggled.
Jeffrey. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he giggled. Like, what's about that? I wonder how.
This is a crazy setup. It's a crazy premise for a joke.
You're not being the allegations after 2 weeks, Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey made a movie. Jeffrey's senior film, unnamed, left unnamed, was about aliens. So I'll leave that at that.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you were pretty racist against those aliens. You painted yourself green, your face, kind of
green face.
Yeah, I think you green faced everyone. I'm not very sensitive to the internet. What do you say about those allegations?
They had it coming.
And this week we watched this. Did you guys both introduce yourselves already? Or
I mean, we certainly
did you just fake
introduced
being
someone.
Jeffrey?
I think people know who we are.
Yeah, I mean, if they haven't, then watch our other episodes. Watch all of our episodes. Give us more viewership.
Yeah,
exactly.
This is chronological,
like,
guys.
If you're on episode 8,
yeah.
If you're on episode 8, you just got to go back. Like, you've gone too far.
Hit the rewind button.
Pretty much. But no, this week we watched, and maybe today, I don't really remember when my co-host said they watched this movie. We watched this movie called Aftersun, which was, pulling up a little fact sheet right here, which was released 2 years ago as I speak now in 2024. So it was released in 2022 from the studio A24. It was the director Charlotte Wells' debut feature. She's done a few other shorts before this. I am not sure if they're available online, but they exist and their names are on IMDb. According to the internet, according to some light Google searching, it has a budget of $4.8 million. According to another Google search, it made $7 million in the box office. I would have loved to see this in theaters. I didn't.
You said this is a debut film?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was.
I would not have guessed that. This is.
I mean, she's done some like shorts, but this was her first feature.
And only like I mean, who knows how many shorts she actually did, but only like 3 shorts that I think you can really find on the internet. So all in all, not done a ton. So really impressive for a debut.
I think it was like a home run.
Yeah. I mean, have they made any other feature films after?
Not since this point, at least nothing that I could find on like an easy internet kind of thing, but maybe if I had dug a little bit deeper, gone to Instagram or something like that. But nothing I could find without like digging too deep.
I like that it insinuates when you want to dig deep on a topic, you go to Instagram. All those college
Well,
papers
like sometimes people just
had to write, pull up the old Instagram.
well, like sometimes things aren't just yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I know
no,
what you mean.
that-
It's just funny phrasing.
Yeah. But we had a lovely cast. I mean, there was like a bunch of people probably. I mean, there's like some people in airports, some people at some hotel. But the two most important people in this movie were the father, or the person who plays the father, who is Paul Mescal, who in the name of, or in the his character's name rather, is Callum, and his daughter, Frankie Corio, who her character's name is Sophie. That was like the most butchered way of saying it, but Paul Mescal and Frankie played Callum and Sophie. And a little fun fact, not the right way to say it, but fact about the movie. A lot of what informed the story, the narrative, the why some things were the way they were and why some things were kind of like beat for beat, like, or at least like framing wise, composition wise, like the small sub details wise, were inspired by Charlotte's own childhood. So I think that is a really cool way or an interesting way to where you could see someone's life and art in a very not so subtle way bleed into that which they create. So that was I think really special.
I think that you can definitely tell that this movie is deeply personal for the director. I don't know. It's incredible because Paul Mescal, he was nominated for an Oscar, like best actor, right? And for that to be in a debut film, I don't know. It's really impressive to me.
Yeah. I do believe that Charlotte also wrote this, which I would have loved to have read this script and to see if it's one of those scripts that's like very loose and like, I don't know, what was it, 100 and an hour and 40 minutes. So roughly that's 100 pages of script. And I'm curious if this would have been like a 40-page script, like very minimal. And it's like, hey, kind of day of, we're getting in the room with our cinematographer, with our actors, and we're just kind of going through it and figuring out what works. It just would have been interesting to see this script. And if it was a very like a beat for beat script, especially because like we said, she's pulling from her own personal experience. So it makes sense that she would be able to flesh out a very atmospheric and tonal shift movie. Or if it was much more like, since it is personal, since she does know it, she's not really going to flesh this script out and she's going to let it kind of be in the moment.
It's this really interesting thing where when you watch a film that is so obviously like personal to the director, to the writer, the well executed films of that kind often feel effortless, but the amount of effort and precision and planning it takes to communicate that in so seemingly effortless a way. I don't think any film that hits as deeply as this movie does is done in a guerrilla style,
Hmm. Well, I guess I see what you're saying. When I say, I guess I didn't say guerrilla style, but what I mean is not necessarily guerrilla style. Because when I think of guerrilla style, I think it's like get in, get it fast, get what you can get. I think much more of like, here is an outline of the scene and maybe what we're trying to communicate, but she didn't like write down verbatim the direction, and maybe the dialogue wasn't verbatim, and maybe it wasn't like, okay, Callum is laying on this area of the bed, then he gets up to go over here to go to the bathroom. I wonder if it's much more like it was more loose, and then they got in that room and they really talked it out. So I'm saying like they didn't get in that room and just like go film this, do that, get out. I wonder if they got more in the room and it was a discussion, a back and forth to create that very real performance that Pascal did so well with. So not guerrilla in the sense of quick in and out, but more in the sense of it was methodical, but they left a lot of room for natural creativity and the performance to lead rather than a really strict script. Does that make sense more?
That makes sense. I almost feel like some level of improvisation is necessary when you're working with child actors too. because you just can't expect them to memorize as much. Granted, she's like 11 years old. It's not, she's not a toddler or anything. She's not like the other child actors we've discussed on this podcast. She did a great job, by the way. Paul Mescal, fantastic, but I think we need to, put some spotlight on her as well. I think that for a child actor, she was so convincing.
I mean, it's funny that we just, randomly pulled this movie out of the hat after last week was Vega's pick, Come On, Come On, with similar-ish tones. But the biggest thing probably was that kind of parental, the storyline of like parenting. And all that to be said, I actually think this actress, I enjoyed, we'll just say it this way, this actress's performance more than I enjoyed the previous actress' performance. All in all, I think both did a really good job. Go back, listen to our last episode. I really did commend the actor who played Jesse, something Norwood. But I just enjoyed watching Frankie's performance of Sophia more. It just was, I would say, more engaging and believable.
I agree. I feel like the kid's performance in Come On, Come On, it was good, but it also felt a little more manufactured.
Yeah, it felt like a performance, which again, it was good. It was really good. This one, and I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this in the episode, but like nothing felt like a performance. It really felt like stuff you would camcord recording of what was actually happening of these real people.
Also, I want to tell the story about the first time I had started watching Aftersun, because a few years back I'd started watching it and then I turned it off. And that's because I was on a plane, right? And I just finished watching Amelie on a plane. It's a movie that I'd wanted to watch for a while, but I didn't really know much about it. And it turns out that's an awful film to watch on a plane because there's a lot of nudity. There's a scene in a porn shop, and you just see people going at it. And it was so awkward. So awkward. I don't know how I finished it.
Did you? You did. So you paused Aftersun, but you manned your way through Amelie on the airplane. Good job.
No, I manned my way through Amelie.
No headphones, no nothing.
And afterwards, I figured I still have a few hours left. Aftersun. I know nothing about this film. It seems interesting to me, and so I started watching it. And y'all know how successfully this movie creates a feeling of unease.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
In that first scene, the glitchy editing and those weird movements that Callum makes on the balcony when he's smoking. And then the hard cut to the morning, he's in the bed, his shirt's off. Cut to, they're at the pool, he's putting sunscreen on her. I was worried that this would be a very different kind of film. And especially seeing the R rating, I did not feel that a plane was the space to watch this movie. And especially after having watched Amelie, which is inappropriate for very different reasons, like an inappropriate movie to watch on a plane, I was like, I'm just not going to risk it anymore. I think I've taken too many risks today.
When the man found out there's no nudity in it, he was like, this isn't for me on an airplane.
No, but what were you saying?
I was just going to say, I mean, I'll be interested to hear your full thought. But yes, I also went in knowing very little, basically nothing. I mean, I think Vega maybe mentioned, and Taylor, my roommate, kind of mentioned like, oh, it's the idea of like a woman in her 30s reflecting on like a vacation she had with her father and how maybe her view of her father as a kid has now shifted from where she's 30. So not very much going in, but just like, yeah, there is something to these more, maybe this is doing a discredit to indie kind of art house films, but I do get uncomfortable going in with like this, like trying to put up a safeguard. Like, I don't know what they're going to throw at me, and the uneasy, and I think they did a good job of creating this unease. And with I just was suspicious of the father for a really long time. I was like, is this father going to be a bad person?
Y'all ain't ever dealt with a 30-year-old guy with like depression.
But I didn't know that going in, and I just was like, I'm suspicious of this father. By the end, I really liked Callum. I really liked Callum's character, but like for the first 40-ish minutes, just how they were editing and what they were holding on, it just gave this like pseudo-sexual undertone, and I just was afraid that Callum was struggling with something that wasn't just depression.
I was worried that this would turn into like an abuse plot line.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend watched this with me, and she had that same suspicion, like independently of me. And this whole movie, there's an underlying current of uncomfortable sexuality that I think is intentional, and I think it reflects her own experience of undergoing puberty and experiencing feelings that she's never felt before, right? And they're new and they're scary. But I think some of that sexual discomfort was communicated in a somewhat of a misleading way, at least at the start.
Yeah, this this movie was so interesting. It's such a hard movie because you weirdly it almost, I don't know, correct me if you guys totally think if you disagree. Also, I'm so sorry, Vega. It must be a movie that we all at least found interest with because I don't think ever before have we just like ripped away the intro away from the host so quickly to jump into the movie. So if there's more you wanted to do on the intro of the hosting side, I'll let you get back to it. But I'll just say this final thought. And I didn't have this, I haven't formulated this thought until this moment right now. So again, if it's not very well put together. But there is almost this idea, kind of where you're talking about Jeffrey, of almost like the unreliable narrator, like what you get with a lot of like books. But there almost was this idea that that there was this idea of this unreliable narrator, not in the sense of the information we were given, but in how things were being perceived. And like you said, Jeffrey, I also and my fiance also were like, we feel uneasy, and this could be like we could see this becoming like an abusive story of like a father struggling with issues and being like sexually abusive with his daughter, which was a very different film and a different conversation. But I'm curious if the reason it had that undertone is because we're seeing it from this 11-year-old's point of view. And I'm not saying this 11-year-old is sitting here thinking, oh, my father is a weird, creepy dude that might be abusive, but like just this idea that like everything felt like a big swirl. All the emotions, everything Callum was feeling, everything that Sophie was feeling felt like nothing was pinpoint. Nothing was like obvious, like, hey, this emotion is attached to this. Everything just kind of felt like a big swirl of emotions all happening at once that got jumbled together and kind of shaken around. So again, not an unreliable narrator in the sense of, oh, this is from Sophie's perspective and she's narrating and she's leaving parts of the story out or lying about parts of the story. Not like that unreliable, but unreliable in the sense of this whole movie takes place through a memory. I mean, kind of half through camcorder, like real found footage, and half through like a memory of a vacation from 21 years ago. So unreliable in the sense of I was 11 going through puberty. There were all these big swirling emotions and new things that I didn't understand at the time. So she's unreliable because she doesn't even know herself. Does that connect to make any sense whatsoever? And it's totally fine if it doesn't.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Jeffrey, if you have something to say, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to respect Vega, you being the host, and this is your movie. I know you're excited to talk about it, so I want to give you the floor to do your actual hosting intro.
I just think it's so interesting between the TV guys and y'all's partners that like that's where you guys landed with it. Do you guys just do all the adults in y'all's life suck like that bad? Like not that I don't know people who have been like a certain level of close in my life who have like been horrible people, but that's just not how he read, like how Callum read to me at all. So that's just so interesting to hear. Like that's just like 4 people right on the bat. It's like
I think I've just been burned before with these types of movies. When I say types of movies, I mean movies that are, I mean, just for lack of better words, like the more, I think this is just honest. The more Indian art house a film is, the less it's controlled by a production company and money. So therefore they can do what they want. And when people want to do what they want, I think movies get more creative. They have better storytelling. They get better in general, usually. That's not always a 1-for-1. But also, what you have with that is less restriction. So you can explore and push the boundaries. So you have ideas and themes being pushed that you wouldn't get in the normal way of storytelling in like films. And I feel like when those boundaries start to get pushed by humans, they sometimes can go into uncomfortable territories. I am not saying that we shouldn't have films talking about sexual abusers. Like I think like stories can be good to bring light to that. So I'm not saying
I'm not saying like, well, I did literally say, do y'all just have horrible adults in your lives? But it's just so interesting to see 4 different people right off the bat like have that like inclination of thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's just like I just big asterisk to anyone who's just listening. That ain't it. That ain't what happened. That homie is incredibly sad. He's a young he was a teen parent, then became incredibly depressed 30-year-old. So like it's just so interesting seeing like I guess that's how you're processing him the whole time versus how like I came to it as. So like they both my co-hosts kind of described as to kind of where they were at. I was coming, or at least the first time I watched it, like might have been 2 years ago. It might have been like a year and X amount of months ago. But then I watched it again just recently in preparation for this. My leaning towards Callum was more like just in a general sense sad, duh. But in another sense, just trying to hold something together to some extent. Like there's just so many like plot things that kind of lead to that, where it's like, oh, this is kind of like the hotel's kind of like not the hotel that like he might want to have Bringer to kind of thing. And there's just like little details where it's just like, oh, he's kind of like rough, not necessarily roughing it, but just like things aren't ideal. So it just maybe he's not in the best place, but he still wants to be there for his kid. And then as you just see the movie go on, you could see him be able to less and less put on that face. Like as to where in the past he might have been able to, he just can't. And it just continually eats away at him to with the whole thing that happened, or the to what is I think is insinuated what happens at the end of the film, or at the end of the mini DV tape playing, is that I'm pretty sure he's insinuated to have killed himself after that holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I don't know. It's just so interesting. I mean, I get what you're saying with your explanation. They're just like, boo.
No, I think that pretty early on, I picked up on his suicidal, ideation, and I could sort of predict where his arc would end. But upon first watching the movie and watching that opening scene with the glitchy footage of a father and daughter, how the music and the editing and the visual effects were interacting with each other to create this feeling of unease, coupled with the fact that he's, arguing with the hotel people. They're in one bed, right? Instead of the two that they had originally planned on. And then she goes to bed and he steps out onto the balcony and he's making a lot of really odd movements that perhaps, in retrospect, he was doing Tai Chi. But I didn't know that when I was first watching it. And then that hard cut and he's on the bed and his shirt is off. I don't know. I think that the filmmaking lends itself to an interpretation.
See, I just don't think it does. Like those moments, I don't necessarily think have to just be like, am I like 0 for 4 on this one? Yeah. Like I'm fighting an uphill battle, but I just don't think that's like.
I don't think that's the only interpretation, but I think that perhaps you can see why.
Yeah, I just think it's lame. Not like towards you guys' end. Like I know it's other things that are informing why you guys landed there. So I'm not blaming the 4 people who I disagree with fundamentally, but I disagree entirely.
On that note, if any of you guys have watched this movie along with us this week, or after this conversation you find it interesting enough to go watch the movie, hit us up. Email us at theholymoment podcast@gmail.com, or us on Instagram at theholymomentpodcast, and let us know if you agree with us or with Vega, or if you're somewhere in between where you're like, oh, there are certain moments I could see this or not. We'd be interested in knowing, because we are a divided house here. But before we get off too much on a tangent on all of this, I don't want to rip away from our host this week, our lovely host, Christopher Vega. Vega, how do you want to start off this podcast? What do you want to talk about?
Good question. I think we got a bit derailed, but I think we did touch some important things. But there was something that you said that I thought was actually really interesting. I don't know which one of you said it. So one of you guys mentioned the idea of the unreliable narrator.
Me. It was Nathaniel.
Okay, Nathaniel. Okay. So like towards that end, that is kind of exactly what I think the film is doing. Somebody who lives with one of the co-hosts, Nathaniel Lirio, mentioned how this was a 30-somethings-year-old woman looking back and reflecting on a relationship with her father through watching the tape. And I think that also does affect, or that, like, that's just an abject fact. But I do think that also helps inform, like, I mean, it's quite literally in how it's edited. It's like, it begins with, like, if you guys at home, if you guys, gals, whoever at home have home videos and you guys still have the cameras that this was shot on, if it's a VHS, it looks a little bit different. But if it's a mini DV, that's what it looks like. I actually have one on my desk right now. Here. For audio listeners, sucks to suck, but for people who are watching this is a mini DV tape. This is the kind of tape that this was recorded on, or not the entire film, but the camcorder sections, and the whole unreliable narrator thing. Like that, I think like that's what the movie's doing. Like the whole thing, it's some of it is like, oh, this is her reflecting, and this is her watching what she recorded back then of her father at that holiday in Turkey. But there's like other parts of the movie which are very obviously not shot on a mini DV camcorder, which like help kind of round out the characters. You see things that you wouldn't have seen. You see Callum alone, very uneased, very roughed. And the Turkish rug shop, you see Callum, I think, butt booty naked, sobbing his eyes out on the edge of a bed. You see Callum in so many instances that we know what's going on. We have this more fleshed out idea of what Callum is, but there's this maybe unreliable, may not be like the most accurate word, but maybe this incomplete notion of who Callum is to his daughter. And like she can kind of remember some things. Like there's the moment where Callum asks her to turn off the camera. Like I could still see the red lights going. Like I don't think Callum wanted his daughter to remember him that way. Like at least not in like that kind of, I guess, infinite, the kind of like set in stone kind of way. But they did have a personal talk about it outside of like, cut the cameras. But that's just the whole thing. That I think that is what the entire movie is doing. And then it begins with like, it feels like have either of you guys driven in an old car where you have to like, well, not that old, but a car where you have to turn a dial to like, or just have you ever used a radio that you have to turn a dial to like get to the right station?
What?
Yeah.
What? Wait,
Like,
isn't that old cars? How do they do it nowadays?
Well, sometimes you just hit a. Actually, no, I think all cars are dials. I don't know why I'm.
Oh,
I'm
where
trying
does
to
this
make it-
man live in 2011? In the future.
I think the car I currently drive had like has an aftermarket thing inside of it, so you just like keep on like hitting on a screen till you get a different number.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm poor. I'm kidding. I know what you mean, though. Yes,
Okay.
I know how the radio
But-
works.
It feels like the first, like, in terms of the whole like not quite the narrator might not know what's completely going on, like this, like how your roommate Taylor mentioned, like it's this or like that idea mixed with the radio thing of this tuning into like this previous part of yourself, this previous like image that you have of a memory of someone you once knew, in this case her father. And then I think that's what that under pressure dance floor sort of like lights doing some sort of weird effect / the mini DV tape like fast forwarding and pausing and going forward, and you could hear the noise of what it's all of that. I think that is all working towards like this like tuning the radio, getting back into that memory space, and then that's kind of exactly how you leave. I mean, with this actualized, you see his daughter, Sophie, as a kid on the dance floor, and then you see like her adult self, and then you see them like kind of interspersing between the two, and then her like losing the ability to hold on to this memory of her dad. And then that interspersed with the scene of him saying goodbye to her on the little camera, and then it's like this stops on the frame of her waving goodbye, and then it turns to the uh, cinema camera pointing down, and then him walking away. Like I think that's what the whole movie was doing. I think you're so on the money with that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy because it was just a thought I randomly had. But as I was saying it, I was like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. And as you just described it, I think you're correct. More than unreliable narrator, it is a missing narration. And something that I totally didn't even think about while watching the movie was, and I mean, this is how movies work in general, but like this movie hinged on the idea that Sophie was trying to recreate who her father was through these fragmented memories and these fragmented videos. But something I didn't really realize until you were just saying it is we, the audience, get to glean a lot more into Callum's personal life, even though a lot of it was still so vague and left up to like interpretation. We still got much more than what Sophie ever got. You know, she really got this like slightly smoothed over person. You know, she didn't get to see a lot of the cracks and the divots. Oh, I think she did see the cracks. I think even Sophie, in my personal opinion, I mean, this relates back to the last episode. Come on. Kids are a lot more perceptive and smart. They pick up on things. They are not just dumb little people. I think Sophie was picking up on the cracks in her father's kind of, I don't want to say facade, but like he was just trying to put on a brave face for her. I think she was picking up on a lot of it, and it made her uneasy already in an uneasy time where she's in a new location, like going through puberty. So but all I'm saying is it dawned on me, Vega, while you're speaking, this idea of, yeah, Sophia, we, the audience, we don't get to know a lot about Callum's backstory and why he's depressed to some degree, but Sophie gets even less. She really only gets the ever so slight, like when you throw a rock and a pond and then it makes a splash. I feel like we got to see the splash. Sophie only got to see, you know, when the rock sinks to the bottom and then a little bit of like dust of like the water, the mud at the bottom of the pond kind of like shakes to the top. That's all Sophie got to see. She got to see just like the residual of his kind of pain. And so to piece that together would be so hard. And there's an interesting concept of her trying to piece this together, but we, the audience, actually get to see more than she ever got.
It's so interesting because we as an audience get more closure on who Callum was than Sophie does because of those moments that we're privy to that she's not. And we don't get closure on much, right? There's still so many unanswered questions about him. And so, I don't know, it really makes me feel for Sophie. It was a bitter ending for us, but it's even more bitter and unknown for her. Yeah. The one scene I think about that Sophie didn't get to see and will never see and will never know is the moment when he walks himself to the beach and he walks into the waves, the inky blackness, and just disappears. That was a really powerful image to me. It's just him giving himself up to the void. And of course, that wasn't, the moment he died, but it definitely foretold what was to come. It was a really powerful moment for me.
Yeah, I appreciated. This is something I talked about with my roommate and fiance after we watched the movie. What I do really appreciate of what these indie films are allowed to do, because when you're part of a big production company and you have to be going to theatrical release and you're expected to make a bunch of money, so you have to do certain formulaic things. What I appreciate this movie really did, and most movies just within this sphere of art house kind of indie filmmaking, also Come On did this, and I mentioned it. I really appreciate how much they can just leave untold. Like how much they can bring stuff up and then there doesn't have to be any payoff with it later on. And I think we as the audience are okay with that because we are the audience aren't looking for the spoon-fed plot point, set up this, payoff, set up this, payoff. It's much more just like all of these really, really random little moments, this emotional reaction, this little bit of history with the background of like, my mom forgot my birthday, and so she drove me to the store and I got a phone. Like, what are we supposed to do with that? And another movie, it would really be a setup and payoff. This just like barely peels back the tiniest bit of layer to begin to understand this person, but we really don't fully. But I appreciate that they're able to do that. They're allowed to like set things up very incrementally and not have a full payoff, because that's what's able to create a much more atmospheric tone rather than a really, really hard driven narrative tone. So I really like that about A, art house films, indie films, but B, specifically this movie, I think did a phenomenal job with that.
Well, I think those kind of techniques, like I think, like I was saying, perfectly work with how Charlotte chose to portray Paul's character, Callum. Like, I think that those techniques and what you're doing go hand in hand perfectly. Maybe not everything perfectly. I don't know where it wouldn't work, but like, it doesn't have to, like, some, like how you're saying, like some things are just shown and don't get much payoff. Like, there's just so many moments where we are able to just see into Callum, but that's kind of exactly who he is. He doesn't eat, like, I mean, little by little, like, pieces you get throughout the film. If you're an audio listener, then I'm moving my hands in a really suspicious way across the frame. But Callum, like, if you're, I guess, if you're going with the quote unquote like unreliable narrator, like the narrator doesn't have the full scope of what is like all the information that's available to the audience, i.e. us, or e.g. EX colon us. Callum doesn't want to, like I was saying earlier, I do not believe that Callum wanted Sophie to remember him a certain way. So he is, in a similar way to how the film is doing, he is to his own daughter, only giving little like pieces, like not giving because he wants to, just giving because he like is actively throughout the film breaking, like like you were saying, how she could see some of those cracks, and there's just like he just can't put on anymore, like as to where previous trips, like that I think that, and then it kind of shows into like as much as what can be shown is with what is there. I think there's so much that is also shown with what didn't happen. He didn't go up to sing with her. He didn't interact with her in so many different ways that like maybe a previous Callum that we weren't shown would have. But like there's, through the lack of what happens, that tells us I think so much more than maybe like the omission, I think, is like maybe more effective than him doing something.
I agree. And concerning the whole karaoke scene and him wanting to sort of control the narrative and make sure he's remembered in a very specific way, when she comes back to her seat and he talks to her about voice lessons, right? Hey, like we'll get you voice lessons. I'll pay for it. And then she makes that really stinging comment about, hey, don't promise to pay for things that you can't afford. And you can tell that it hits him, right? That he takes it like a stab in the heart. But you see that in his eyes, right? In the moment, he just sort of laughs it off. He doesn't want to address it. Not in front of her, right? They're here to have a good time. But again, sometimes with him, it's too hard to be fully committed to the facade. So he can't go up with her to do karaoke. Those two sides are in constant conflict.
I can't even begin to imagine the pain of feeling, and I think there's probably a lot going on with Callum's character for why he's depressed. And it is interesting. I think something that we have to keep in mind is, and I don't know how much we talked about this, but I believe it's pretty much confirmed that a lot of this is the director Charlotte Wells. I'm not saying one for one experience, but I think a lot of it is very, very, very heavily informed. And if not, some of it might be a one for one. But all that to be said. So I'm just trying to say, like, it's weird talking about a character, but in Realms, this character reflects a very real person. So I think that's just important to the audience and for us to keep in mind as we kind of have this discussion. But for the character of Callum, all I'm saying is we didn't fully know him. Sophie didn't fully know him, and we don't fully know why he's depressed. But what I was going to say, I can't imagine the pain it must feel like to be a parent, and specifically a father, because one day, all three of us might hypothetically be fathers, and to feel like you're failing your child, financially, emotionally, can't provide for them physically, and And I already know what it feels like in my life for people I really care about, my friends, my family, my fiance, to feel like I'm not enough. And therefore you want to pull back. And there becomes moments like Jeffrey was saying, you can put on the facade, you can put on the happy face of like, well, I'm going to do this for them. But it becomes so heavy and so burdensome that I'm not saying it's the healthy choice to make, but we often make the choice of I'm going to retreat in this moment. And it's interesting that, like Vega, you were saying these things he used to be able to do, but maybe as he becomes more guilty, more depressed, more isolated, he is no longer able to bear this facade. He's no longer able to bear what he wants to be for his daughter, and he can't, and therefore he retreats emotionally. And the only way he knows how to make up for it, and I think you see this often in real life, is with gifts, saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry that I can't be here emotionally for you, but what if I buy this for you?" And I think Sophie wasn't just reacting to, "Hey, you won't be able to keep up your promise," but also like, I don't want lessons. I want my father to sing with me. I don't want this thing. I want my father. And I think you can see that in like real life child psychology when parents cannot provide emotionally for a kid. And I say all this because I think it's so true to maybe connect this to real life situations, because this is so closely tied to a real life situation. And so I could understand how maybe and again, I want to be careful because I don't know Charlotte's full life story, but I think it's fair to glean. It's fair to say that this director purposely put so much of her own story. So I think it's fine to kind of glean and maybe try and guess and do some guesswork of like the real life people. But all that to be said, it probably would be really hard for her to grow up with a father that you feel like you don't know emotionally and can't give any, like can't be there for you emotionally. And then for later on in life to reconstruct how you feel about, not even reconstruct, but just like try and build a picture of who this person is.
I think that this idea of, time changes so much for us, for perspective on like situations and relationships and people. And one thing I thought was done really well in the karaoke scene in the background, they're playing Unchained Melody, which is a song that directly touches on the effect of time on love. I'm going to read a lyric that I think that we can discuss. It's, "Woe, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time, and time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. Are you still mine? I need your love. I need your love. Godspeed your love to me." And I feel like time changes her perspective on love and on her father, but it doesn't change. That love doesn't change, right? I think that, I don't know. I just think that there are things worth talking about in those lyrics and as it pertains to the film. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? I just think that the song choices for the film were great in general.
I think it just kind of really devastating. And I can't even imagine how much more devastating it would be to see what level of true this is to a real life other human being who shares this earth and this oxygen with us. But as far as the movie goes, seeing can you read one of those lines off again, Jeffrey, or the line that you read off again?
Yeah, I'll just read, "Time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. Are you still mine? I need your love. I need your love. Godspeed your love to me."
At least just like, yeah, and at least observing or thinking about how these two characters are interacting with each other, and this idea of like love, just in a really general 5,000 foot view, or maybe more than that. But I think for me, which might touch on why I like really didn't come to the movie in the same place as like Michael, or like at least didn't have the same like first impression of it, was like I see Callum as this really devastated guy, but I think he's so deeply, so I think genuinely loves his daughter. I think that is made very clear throughout the film. But I do think that there is this thing that doesn't quite grab because of this, I guess, just image that he can't just, I guess, let go of to maybe serve in the sense of him maybe getting better, or that might be far too much of a damning thing to say, but like he does definitely love his kid, but maybe he just can't love her in the way that she needs, or in a way that like can super relate to her. And I think Sophie loves her father. I think she's so excited to, I mean, there's like moments where she has like nippy comments or whatever and that kind of thing, or some like shows some general discontent, but I think she like is really happy just to even be with him in Turkey on that, like so elated to be with him on that on a holiday in Turkey. But I just think there's some things that I think, at least on Sophie to his side, are so devastated in the same sense of like the which makes like the lyrics like from I don't know who sang it originally. I'm just saying like Elvis is like the like I need your love, I need your love. Like in moments like where she's saying things like I think it's really nice that we, or something to the effect of, if this isn't the exact quote, I think it's really nice that we share the same sun, kind of thing. Which is this, there is this inexplicable thing that like links us together. And then just I don't think that that was not necessarily that he doesn't love his daughter, but that he doesn't. There's just some level of like lost in translation to how they are able to, how he as a 30 something father who is falling apart is able to communicate that, like his love for his daughter, and how his daughter doesn't really, it's so, it's just a ghost. It just like feels like a ghost hand love kind of thing. And it's, I think, just incredibly devastating. If that kind of relates to, I mean, maybe that's a bit more of a stretch, but I think that's kind of how I took the, at least how like at least some of the lyrics or one line from that song can just be so haunting in relation to that love thing between the characters. Does that track, or am I like insane?
No, that tracks 100%. I feel like hearing you uh, speak on it has helped me elucidate why that song hit for me so much. Which before I guess go into that in more detail, I want to hear what Nathaniel has to say about it.
Oh, mine's taking a little bit of a different direction, so I don't want to detract too much. So, Jeffrey, if you want to say, if this relates to what Vega said, I don't want to move the conversation away from that.
Yeah. So in that scene, we see Callum trying to connect with his kid and failing because the whole karaoke debacle happened and he didn't sing with her. And plus, she's going through puberty. She's changing, right? And things have changed, including his relationship with her. Like he used to sing karaoke with her all the time, but now it hasn't. And so I'm sure in his mind he is wondering, hey, like where has the time gone? You know, time goes by so slowly, but time can do so much. Are you still mine? And then fast forward to adult Sophie, and she's kind of asking the same question. Whoa, my darling, my love, I've hungered for your touch. I've missed you. And so much time has passed, it passes so slowly, but as it's passed, I've gained new perspective. That's what time has done for me. Are you still mine? Are you still as I remembered you? And even as an adult, there's this feeling of I need your love, but you're gone now. And so I feel like it can be understood both from Callan's perspective and Sophie's.
It's interesting. I'm happy to let you go first, Vega, Jeffrey, because that actually transitions into my thought about my interpretation. Not my interpretation of the song, but just in a way that it connected to the story to me, and that was with older Sophia, or Sophie. Just something I thought a lot about this film, and maybe kind of how it impacted me, was this idea of seasons of life. It's not lost on me the importance of why adult Sophie is watching these tapes right now. It seems she's recently married, she has a newborn child, and she just turned 31. So she's entering the season of life in which Callum was, which, if we are going under the hypothetical interpretation that Callum took his life soon after that vacation, she longer has no more information. Like, she was able to glean all of the information for all of the stages of her life compared to her father's until this exact moment. She is now entering the phase of life where her father's phase of life ended. He's 31. He was married to the mother, but was more or less in a relationship recently, had a child, was entering into this new season of adulthood. And she no longer has this point of connection. Just like in the interview when she was trying to interview her father, like, hey, I just turned 11. What was it like when you turned 11? Finding these bits and pieces, these things, these onions she can peel back, the cracks she can see through to see her father. Because I think a lot of children, like real life children, are looking who they are through their parents. And I think she was constantly looking for validation, right and wrong, who she was through her father. And she was able to get, even though it was only a little bit, she was at least able to get something. But if he died recently after that, she has entered the phase where he is no longer, he didn't progress past that phase. She will. So all that to be said, that song to me, those lyrics resonate with me in the idea of time is so slow, and seeking your love out is this idea of seasons of life. And sometimes how you don't realize you need something from someone until you get into a season of life. You don't realize how greatly you appreciate your parents until you become a parent. You don't realize sometimes how important things are until there's been enough time in between them and until you are in that season of life. And so that's kind of, and again, I don't know if that connects for you guys, but that's kind of those lyrics, how they impacted me the most is more for future Sophie than maybe even Sophie. Because I felt like, for me personally, the lyrics were pretty clear between like current day Sophie and Callum and the distance that have grown between them, and they want to love each other, but they can't because they're on different wavelengths. That was all great. Sorry. This is not me belittling y'all's points. This is just saying for me, that's what I saw right away. And I was like, oh, cool. Yep, makes sense. But as the movie went on, and then I saw like older Sophie, I started to relate it back to that song in that moment and realizing how time has gone on. And maybe there's a reason she turned on, like I said, she turned on those VHS tapes and was watching through it because she entered into this season, because enough time had progressed her to the point of life that Callum was at on that vacation. So does that track?
I think that completely tracks, yeah.
And that's why, like, the song choice, Charlotte, that's the name of the director?
Yeah.
Like, she did a great job with these song choices because they're so applicable in so many different directions, but it all feels intentional.
Did you guys feel any certain way, or like, did it hit in any way for either of you guys? Like, it's relating to the time thing, to the aspect of like time and seasons and that kind of thing. Of this, I think I don't know if resentment is the right word, or just very like grim realization, perhaps, that Callum may have thought that his daughter might be just like him in a way, or might like end up like him. And by that, there's like, I guess, just two random or two phrases. One of them I don't think super like ties back in, or maybe it might tie back in the end, depending on whatever I say or whatever our general thoughts are. But this idea, or maybe this might not be Callum to Sophie, but Sophie to Callum, that she doesn't want to. Maybe she doesn't want to see some element of herself in her father, and that there's this somewhere throughout the film where he mentions that he didn't ever really see himself making it to 40. He didn't really even think he'd see 30. There's that, and I don't think that she would want to fall into that on a daughter to father instance, but on a father to daughter instance, this idea of, or to the whole idea of maybe like some level of resentment, or maybe just some level of like grief, looking or hearing what her daughter was saying about when he was in the bathroom, and she, I think, was sitting on the bed or laying on the bed, and there's this brief thing that she says about like, do you ever feel like you're sinking? Do you ever feel like you're that? Do y'all remember that part?
Yeah.
And I feel like how that scene played out felt like that might, like, her saying that didn't disgust him in a way that was like, I can't believe my daughter might feel like this, but in a like horrifying way of, I can't believe my daughter might feel how I might feel, because
Yeah.
I know how, like, not me, but I know how, but Callum's character knows how feeling a certain way at a certain age regressed and evolved into this thing that he is now, and that this thing that he, if the idea of him killing himself is true, this thing that he dies as. So I think there might just be some level of horror and stain, this level of heartbrokenness and this level of grief, and him seeing, or him thinking that he might see some of himself in his daughter, and this like
Yeah.
intergenerational maybe there's been way too much of it, but maybe this intergenerational like struggle with mental health issues or mental illness.
I think that he recognizes that. I think that he tries as best as he can to lead her down a different path, as best as he can, right? And he hasn't coped well with it. But still, like, he's very affirming of her, and he tells her, "Hey, you can be anything that you want to be. You don't have to be limited," right? And then we look at him; he is not anything that he wanted to be, right? But he still is holding out that hope for her. And then later, he's teaching her Tai Chi, right? Which is a method that he has found to cope. Is it successful? No, but it's a way that he has found to cope somewhat, and he's teaching her that, and encouraging her to talk to him, to talk to people when she's using substances and meeting new romantic or sexual partners, and keeping open lines of communication, things that perhaps he wished he had done growing up. I think he recognizes himself in her, but he has more hope for her than he does for himself.
I have like 1,000 thoughts on what you just said, Jeffrey, but I need to really quick respond to Vega's question because that's a great question before I lose my train of thought. I'm going to flip the script real quick because I'm really appreciative, because I was going to take it the route of, does Charlotte see herself, and does Charlotte see her dad in herself? And I appreciate that you took it the route of, does Callum see himself in Sophie? So I'm gonna do it the opposite direction really quick, and then I want to bring it back around and say a few things on what you just said, Jeffrey. I think it's so fascinating and honestly reframes the entire movie for me. If, because how I was presented the movie, and so how I digested the movie, was that Sophie is entering into this new season of life and is now trying to pick up the very few pieces of her father to almost looking for comfort. I'm becoming a wife, I'm becoming a mother, I'm becoming 31. Who went through all those things that I can like look at as a role model? My father. Okay, let me look back on these memories and history and piece together, and maybe something positive will come out of it. But I never thought, what if it's the opposite? What if Sophie hit 31, got a wife, had a kid, and is afraid? What if she's like, what if I am going to end up like my father? And in the deepest, scariest, maybe in the recesses of the corner of her mind, and the darkest conversation this can go, that ends in suicide. What if she's like, just like when she was 11, like Jeffrey said, she already said, does the room just feel wrong? Do your bones just feel off? So obviously she was already, and I don't like, sometimes when we're 11, we say crazy things and we can be sad, but it's not like the end of the world depression. But I mean, looking at Callum, there's probably something deeper going on. But the point is, she was feeling that at 11. We don't know anything about Sophie's life between 11 and 31 at all. We have no idea if things went better, worse, normal, good, bad, anything in between. So the point is, it's so intriguing, the idea of like, what if she woke up one day and was terribly afraid of that sinking feeling in my bones never went away? And guess what? It didn't go away from my father, and he killed himself. What if I am my father? And she is rewatching these videos for glimpses of how can I create a full picture of my father and see if that picture, is she trying to recreate a picture, a mirror of her father to look into and to see if she sees herself, because she is scared. I'm not saying that's what the movie was. I'm just saying that's a really, really interesting take. Does she see her father in herself, and what does she see in her father? Does she see something horrifically tragic, or does she see something hopeful or normal? Like, he's a dude, he's a dad. What more is there to say? So I wanted to say, take it that way. And then I want to respond to what Jeffrey said, something really fascinating that I talked about with my fiance afterwards. And I think, Vega, you mentioned it too. This idea of generational depression. We talk about it in the church. We talk about it in the secular world. I think it's at this day and age, I think it's a relatively common idea of just like, whether you want to call it generational curses, whether you want to call it like just like generational mental health, whatever you want to call it within whatever facet of you find yourself in this conversation. But the idea is things get passed down, whether it's DNA, whether it's spiritually, whether it's in the makeup of who we are, whether it's hereditary, but things get passed down from family to family to family. And the idea is that Callum came from a pretty bad childhood and now he is depressed. And what if you pass it on to his daughter? And what I have to say about that is going to what you were saying, Jeffrey, that conversation when they're floating in the ocean on this pool and he's like, hey, whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever under the sun, I don't care what you do, just tell me. I thought it was really interesting. And here's my thought, and I'm curious if you guys disagree with me. It's always a great thing to see a parent, and this is me talking about real life, not the movie. It's always an impressive, great thing when you see an adult who had a horrible upbringing and said, you know what, I'm going to do better for my children. I'm going to do better financially. I'm going to treat them better. I'm going to give them a better safe home, food, emotional safety. It's always such a respectable thing to see. But I think what is very common is someone who has a bad upbringing wants to do better and they do the best they can. But the best they can is not perfect because in their defense, they're working with like a fifth of what everyone else is working from. So they kind of start from like 0 or maybe 5%. And they can give their children 20%, and their children can give their children's children 30, and then 50, then 60, and then all of a sudden you have a pretty healthy person. Unfortunately, it only takes one person to come along in that chain to ruin things for like a generation. But the point is, what I'm trying to say is, it was very obvious that one story that Callum had about his parents and how his mom drug him to the toy store by the ear to say, hey, pick out a toy. Clearly, I don't care about you. Clearly, I'm not a safe place. Clearly, I don't want to talk to you. And then he's doing the opposite. He's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do everything in my power. Do whatever you want to do. Just, I'm a safe person. Come talk to me. And I'm curious, do you guys feel that is a progression better than what Callum was treated, but there is a healthier, better way to handle that conversation that maybe Sophie can now glean from and then have with her future child?
Yeah, I think that there is a sense of progression there. Again, keeping lines of communication open. I think that he probably could have been a bit harder have a harder line on, hey, like, abusing drugs is bad. But perhaps that's a separate conversation. I think that what he was trying to communicate is, hey, even if you do things that hurt yourself, I don't want you to do those things, but I love you first and foremost. I don't want you to feel that there's any shame in coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he didn't communicate that as explicitly as he could have. I think that's the idea that he was going for. But I think that that's something that she can take with her and then probably communicate better to her children.
Yeah, I don't think I have necessarily a problem with how he said it at all. I think piggybacking a little bit off what Jeffrey said, but maybe using a different word or a different phrase, I think that kind of phrasing can kind of at least lead to, maybe not lead to, but maybe come from more of a heart of what I believe that Callum had for his kid, which was, I think, this degree of unconditional love. Like, he definitely loves his kid. And he didn't, I don't believe he got to see what she became. And that's heartbreaking, but in its own. But I think it's definitely like a, just not to, or maybe to some level condemn some people who choose to parent in this way. Like, would you rather have like a kid who you talk to and have that kind of communication with, and you are still able to love them, or would you rather just not have a kid at all? So, I would personally, and I think on a stance, on a digging my roots down to this take, I would lean more towards what Callum would have to say than, or Callum's. I think this unconditional. Maybe that's too too said of a word or too said of a phrase, but this unconditional love that I think that that is the kind of heart which that kind of phrase could be rooted out of. I mean, it could just be rooted out of a just wanting to be open, but I think the character of Callum and that phrase are linked
Mm-hmm.
in that way. I mean, I could just be wrong. Again, to earlier things I've said, maybe I'm reaching a little bit, but I do think that those things do speak to each other. So I think answering your question to some extent, like I think it doesn't necessarily need to be like even like taking like rephrasing it or reforming the thought. I think it's the heart of what was behind what was said that is. I hope that maybe not just the people, or maybe not just Sophie to her kid, but that just anyone would maybe offer to their kid that period. If that end thought.
Yeah, no. That makes sense. That definitely, it's not so much about what he said, but maybe the heart of it. And I agree. I think ultimately, what he was trying to communicate and the heart of what he was trying to communicate was good. I do agree with that. Um, I'm always just curious with parenting how one can evolve from there, and if there were things that could, I guess, have said could be more clear or be better. But like you also like this whole the whole point of this movie is just a snapshot. I mean, unfortunately, we know more or less we know that she doesn't have a lot of future with her father left, but it is just one conversation. It just, I guess, maybe to dig into this thing a little bit for just a second, if you guys will bear with me. It felt to me like one of those and I mean, we saw it throughout the movie. Like Callum wasn't emotionally available. So it felt like one of those classic moments where like your father isn't emotionally available. And so he musters everything he has in him to just be like, hey, I love you. You're a good son. You can talk to me. And the son's like, yep. And then they never, ever, ever, ever talk. So I will say, I do appreciate, I do think Callum's heart was in, I think he meant it. He really was like, I love you so much. And I want to open up a dialogue and communicate. And I like what you said, Vega. It was less about, hey, let's communicate. And it was more about a heart posture of, I love you. And this is how I can show that I love you. But I guess to me, it felt a little sad in the sense of like, I don't know if what he's saying will ever get to be cashed in on. One, because he might not physically be around because he probably was dead soon after. But even if he didn't die, I don't know if even and this is the tragedy of Callum. I truly believe that he loved his daughter and that what he said is what he wanted. He wanted to be present and he wanted to be available and he wanted to be someone he could confide in. But I am afraid if Callum never, if again we're going with the idea that Callum kills himself, if he never does and he's around forever, I'm just afraid that Callum is not a person that could stand by what he said in that water. Even if he wanted it to be true and he loved her, I just don't know if he could have been what he said. So I guess that's kind of just my final thought. And it was a little melancholy when he said that. I was like, oh, he clearly loves her and he wants to be this for her. I don't think he can because of where he is at in his life. Which, I mean, it just makes a good, realistic human being. Because so often we tell people things we desperately want to be true, and we honestly aren't able to write those checks, unfortunately.
You know, it's a really interesting thing where we talk about how, when she was a child, she noticed all the ways in which he was there, and he was a positive presence in her life. And then she saw things that didn't quite make sense to her. And now as an adult, she's coming to realize and look for that side of him that is more broken. But if we look at it from the opposite end and recognize that, yes, Callum is a broken person, but there are also moments of real love and glimpses of what a whole Callum might look like. I think that there is a world in which Callum lived and is able to address his mental health challenges, perhaps go to therapy and get a prescription to help him just live a more whole life. And I think that is what makes it all the more tragic, is that he did not believe in himself. He did not believe that he was capable of change, and that led to him ending his life. And I don't know. I think that if we see him as a person who could have changed, that adds to the tragedy of the story. And I think that we have reason to believe that. I don't know. I don't know. It seems a little defeatist to assume that if he had lived, he could not have changed, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's a fair point. I guess maybe I did say that, but let me be clear. I guess again, specifically talking about the character Callum. Yeah, yeah. If he had lived, I think I believe that anyone is capable of change. Sometimes it's extremely hard, and sometimes it takes external forces like rehab and people coming into your life and standing by you. But I do believe everyone is capable of change. All I'm saying is Callum had the heart of loving his daughter. And I believe until the day he died, whether it was natural causes or taking his own life, he would have continued to try to love his daughter. But where we met him in this movie, I think what he was saying, he was incapable of doing. And granted, maybe in 6 months, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it would have been different. 100% could have been. But all I'm saying is in that season of his life, it was very melancholy to me because he was saying things that I personally don't think he could have like just in the way it's almost like the same, it's almost like the same but opposite at the same time. The scene at the karaoke where it was so important for Sophie that he come and sing this song with him and he couldn't emotionally bring himself to do that. It's almost like the same where on that raft it felt like it was extremely important for Callum to say this and he said it, but there just was a part of me that, again, not that he didn't have the intentions, he just didn't have the ability to do exactly what he said. And I think that's always what makes it tragic because he's a character that is fighting against desperately what he wants to do and what he's capable of doing. And so, yeah, again, I think there's a future in which he could have gotten help and not only lived, but then also been in a healthy place to help her. But the fact of the matter is, we only met him in this season of life. And in this season of life, I absolutely do not think he was fundamentally in a place, whether of his own fault or not own fault, we just don't know the character well enough to be what he wanted to be for his daughter. And I think, I mean, am I wrong? I think that was a huge aspect of the movie. Callum wanted to be this person for his daughter, and he could not. And it makes it even more tragic when he vocalizes, "Hey, I want to be this for you." And I think as the audience, we kind of understand. I don't think you can be that for her, even though it was all in good heart, all out of love, 100%. But yeah, so I'm not looking at it at a nihilistic defeatist point of view. I'm just looking at it out of this moment. What do we know about the characters? And I know what he is saying. I believe he cannot deliver currently. Could it change? Yes, but currently, I don't think so.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think that as he was saying that on that raft, he probably still had plans to end his life. And so, on the one hand, there's a sense of earnestness when he says, "Hey, like, just talk to me about these things. I'll be here for you to talk to me." But in the back of his head, he's thinking, "I don't know how much longer I have," and that is in conflict.
It's also interesting how almost it's an outcry for himself. Like you said, Jeffrey, if he really was on that raft thinking about, I might take my own life, it really could have been, maybe it's not the healthiest to try and depend on your 11-year-old daughter for your mental health, but that might have been all that Callum knew to do and had. And maybe there's a sense of like him saying like, "Hey, never feel ashamed, guilty, or too far from me. Please just tell me the truth." I wonder if deep down subconsciously he was screaming to himself, "Someone please do this to me. Someone please come and tell me like, hey, no matter what you're going through, tell me the truth. Tell me what's going on."
I think that phrase or like what he says, I think also might tie into him definitely wanting to have this control over how he's remembered, and maybe not necessarily, at least maybe not. I just said that how he's remembered, but I don't know if it's even quite that as much as like if there's one thing that he could leave, maybe with his daughter. Not that there's different things that he didn't say right before this, the final times he ever sees her, but like remembering her father or giving her this, giving her that phrase, giving her that insight, giving her that this is who your father is, and this of it to like like saying I guess I love you like before someone who leaves your house and saying goodbye. That's like the last thing. So you're able to, she's able to. Maybe it was like not necessarily a gift, but like knowing in mind that, like how you guys are saying, maybe he did have some sort of premeditated, this is, I don't know how much I have left in me kind of thing. But maybe to another extent of it, it was a very intentional. Even if I can't fulfill this myself, I want you to remember me as someone who could have, or someone who said they were going to. I don't want you to think of. I don't want you to carry maybe like the inevitable thing if he does end up taking his life. Like she will carry that with her forever. But the other aspect of what kind of person is she carrying with her forever? Even if he couldn't make good on his promise, if he couldn't make good on his word, he was still someone that's that's what he said. And then he dies. Presumably. Like without getting into like whether like should he like is that a right thing? Is that not a right thing? But like I think that just like tying into how I think a lot of his character and a lot of his person ties together. I think that tracks with how the film ends, how you see once the camcorder's closed and once Sophie's gone, that's kind of just it for him. Just even with the cracks, or the moments where he cracked, or the moments where like something shone through that wasn't so bright. I think it was intentional, like the way or the things that he did. So like whether even in this like I'm in a burning ship and I can't get out ness of it that he may have felt, and this is just me speaking into the character. I maybe it wasn't maybe to an extent it was a cry for help, and maybe to an extent it was a like, what can I do before this ship burns me to a crisp? What can I do before the sea swallows me whole? Thing. And to some extent, whether it may have been right for him to theoretically take his own life or not, that I don't think what's up for argument. I think a beautifully tragic thing is just this idea of him, this person, his character, like suffering, but and actively drowning, dying, but still, like, I guess if I'm still using the imagery of the boat, if he is, I guess, on, let's say it's an oil fire, I guess, so it's like it's still on fire in water. He's like holding his daughter, trying to push his daughter up above the flame as I guess his foot's caught somewhere on the boat, so he's going down, but he's through some instances trying to like push her up and then push her up and then push her up, even though he can't save himself.
That's an interesting perspective. I think it's almost. I mean, I love your thoughts on this movie, Vega. They're really reframing some things for me, and it's also. I think you have to with a movie like this. I think there's so much to read into, and I think we're allowed to with this type of movie. I think we're allowed to do a lot of reading into situations and taking away. I think it's a very situational movie that the viewers get to take away their own meaning between relationships between daughter and or more just like kid and parent. So I think it's okay. I think some movies and there's not a lot of reading into that you can do. I think this movie there's a lot of own conclusions people can come to with the themes and the messaging. And I was going to say what I'm saying is it was interesting how earlier how you prompted the idea of like, hey, does Sophie see herself and her father, and that kind of reworked this idea of like, well, what if this whole movie she's going about it from a different perspective than we originally thought. Now flip the script again and say, and it sounds like also Vega, this is maybe how you slightly approach this movie. Just so correct me if I'm wrong, but again, a lot of this movie, maybe Callum's character really didn't fall into place of what was going on with him till like the end for me. So I think if I were to come at this movie with the idea that maybe Callum went into this vacation being like, okay, I either am going to end my life after this vacation or something drastic. Like I'm hoping this last interaction with my daughter can change my mind. Because I don't, did you guys get this idea, this foreboding? Once this vacation ends, something's going to shift. Something's going to change in both of their lives. And you almost don't want this vacation to end. This vacation is almost an ethereal dream where things are weird, but things are okay. And the moment you leave this bubble, something's going to go down. And so it's interesting rewatching this movie from the perspective of Callum and Callum being like, once I leave this vacation, I might end my own life. I think really does rework a lot of what happened in that movie. And that's just really fascinating because I didn't. I guess I was just much more in Sophie's mindset of like her perspective of the story. But if you put ourselves into Callum's perspective, and he's like, okay, I want to present this is my last chance to present myself to a daughter in a way that I want her to remember me, and then I will be gone. And then he's struggling with coming to terms with all of this while trying to uphold some type of facade or some type of, hey, this is who I want to be. Please remember me this way. But deep down, he knows I'm not going to be around anymore. Just all I'm saying is it just changes the perspective of the movie in which you would watch it from, which I think changes every single scene.
I feel like this film 100% would benefit from a rewatch,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
especially given like misleading first impressions. You know, once we disabuse ourselves of our false conceptions of what the movie might be, you know, we can watch it with, you know, that context and really appreciate the steps it's taking to tell this story and to complete his arc.
I 100% agree with you, Jeffrey. This would be a very good movie to rewatch for multiple reasons. I think the big two ones are the misconception of the undertone of sexual abuse at the beginning and just I don't want to say confusion, but the ethereal, like we said at the beginning, the unnarrative, or that's unnarrative, haha, the unreliable slash just not altogether pieced in information. Not only is Sophie dealing with that as a person, we the audience are dealing with that. Like, wait, what's going? I just think there's a lot of what's going on, and not like for the not like a Christopher Nolan movie. What's going on? Things are moving all over. They're jumping in time. There's these mysteries, but like what's going on in the sense of we're just dropped in the middle of these characters' lives, and they're going through emotional things, and we're not really privy to exactly what emotional things are going through. We're just kind of seeing the aftermath and the reaction towards them. So I think getting to the end of it, I have a much better opinion of the perspectives I would take rewatching it, and it would be much more enjoyable. Oh, no, much more enjoyable to an already enjoyable experience. That's what I want to say. Did you, Vega, like, because you've said, I think you said you only watched this movie twice, and you at the beginning of the podcast, you know, you did say like you kind of had a different take on your first experience watching it than Jeffrey and I. Did you have any type of like, oh, after the first watch, the second watch was so much better, or I was able to relate more, or I was able to see the story better for what it was? Or was it really, it was a great time both times, but you didn't glean a lot more from the second watch?
I don't think the rewatch necessarily was like I had to get acquainted to the taste, and then the second time I ate it, then I liked it kind of thing, or it wasn't quite nearly anything like that. I think just some of the reason that it worked the first time and it worked a slightly different way the second time was just kind of maybe where I was when I watched it, and maybe not much more beyond that. I don't think the way I thought about it, approached, and enjoyed the movie is actually too fundamentally different from when I watched it almost 2 years ago and when I watched it today. But that might just, maybe it's like, maybe my perspective on it is kind of just locked into where it was about like a couple of years ago, because I think I could see some elements of that might have also helped inform why I kind of see Callum or read Callum the way I do, and that I could see, or I believe that I could see, that he so clearly loves his daughter, that he so clearly has love towards somebody else. And even though he does express it in some ways, and he does show it, he does, like, there is ways in which you can tell that is true. It doesn't necessarily do it in a way that's, I guess, like, she needs then, and like maybe being emotionally available or being whatever towards them. But my final semester in college was kind of or at least the whole year, my final like year of college was just kind of this burning fire. Like, it kind of, just going back to the ship analogy that I used a little bit earlier, it kind of felt sort of like that. Like, there was definitely people who I know cared about me and loved me and like wanted to be there in different ways maybe for me, but like there was definitely people in my life who I, not in a father-daughter sense, but just in a relational sense, that I may not have loved my in the best way, but my heart was in a certain place to where I know, like, I think and I feel that I'm drowning, and I do not see where this is going, but I still want to act and output a certain level of love out of my heart towards, whoever it was, or whoever it might be. So, like, I think that, like, the where I was at that specific point in my life, and then however many times later, months later, weeks later, that it came out on streaming, like, kind of locked in why I viewed the movie the way I did that first time, and that all those first things are still true because that was just an earlier version of myself. So I think that definitely just does kind of link towards how I approach it now, if that tracks. Slash, if that answers what you were saying, or if that relates at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that relates to, yeah, it's just a question of, did you kind of change perspectives of after watching the second time? But yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. Might be time to go to the holy moment.
Maybe it is. Nah, it is getting a little bit late too. To our viewers at home, who knows how much he's going to cut out of this podcast? Maybe everything until this very moment. But it's 12:05 a.m. the following Tuesday of recording. We started on a Monday. It's Tuesday now. So,
Ooh.
what better time to find a holy moment than just after midnight? And I think we've had such great dialogue, such fascinating dialogue. Just it's been so interesting hearing different ways in how you guys have leaned in or read into or whatever it may be with the film and with its characters. But where do you think you guys have seen a holy moment in this film, if at all, or what was that for you?
I would say that my holy moment is Paul Mescal's whole performance, because he portrayed Callum with such his rawness and believability. And well, like you, Vega, I have at points in my life felt so low as to ideate about like suicide, right? And his comment about not seeing himself at 40 and being sort of surprised that he made it to 30, that is a sentiment that I have at one point held, right? I don't know how long I can actually do this. And so seeing him go through these emotions and seeing him deal with them in the ways that he does, it was a very human performance, and it was a very real performance. And for that reason, I think his performance is my holy moment. But also a shout out to the scene of him walking into the inky black ocean and disappearing in it, and then us holding on that shot for a while. That was very artful.
Yeah, no, that's a great holy moment. Definitely one of the best performances we've seen out of the, I think, 8 movies we've watched now. And my holy moment is loosely tied to that. And this whole time, I've known what I've wanted to say for my holy moment, but the whole time we've been talking, I've been thinking in the back of my mind, like, okay, how can I make it more specific? Because it does feel like a cheat to say like my holy moment is like the whole movie. So specifically, my holy moment was the movie's ability to make a physical location and performance feel so real. And I think they did this a lot of ways, and I'll just quickly highlight a few of them. But what I mean, I could have said performance like Jeffrey, which is a huge component of it. But I think what is more important to me than the performance was, I don't think I've ever seen a movie. I think I've seen movies where I thought there were better performances, but I don't think I've ever seen a movie where the performance didn't feel like acting. It didn't feel like a character. They felt real. And I think first and foremost, that starts with the director and the script and the fact that this was so clearly a personal story. I don't think you get these type of people without basing them off real people. So there's that. But specifically, I think what really, really, really helped them was how they edited this. I touched a little bit about this earlier in the podcast, but I loved how they played with time with this film. I don't think we often talk about in filmmaking and editing how we usually are in a very, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 months, 6 months. We just go linear with time in movies. I think the classic what people will talk about is Christopher Nolan, how he plays with time, and he's great at it, amazing. But this movie was so different than anything Christopher Nolan's done. It felt like a bubble on an island, and you never knew what time of day it was. You never knew where you were, and there were it definitely was linear. It was pretty like we kind of told the story from the day one of the vacation to the end of the vacation, so it was relatively linear. But the weird abysmal, it felt like the weird abysmal space between time where time didn't exist, and because time didn't exist, there didn't have to be these connective tissues and moments of a narrative story, which means we were allowed to just have scenes. We could just have scenes of them at the pool playing Marco Polo to cutting to scenes of them having dinner scene karaoke. It allowed for this freedom to be anywhere and any time at any point on this island doing the most random thing, which is how memories work. Try and remember a vacation. You can't remember it very well linearly. You remember based on the impact of the memory. And so the fact they were doing it based on like this memory and the impact on the memory, it allowed them to create this real sense of, hey, this is how I remember things. And therefore the performances felt more real. The cinematography felt more real. The locations felt more real. The home footage they shot with the real footage they shot felt hand in hand the same. Everything felt so that could have been ripped out of a real moment that happened a second ago and been presented on this TV. And I think that is incredibly, incredibly impressive. I do not think all movies, if any, most movies should do that. I don't think most movies should strive for that. It was very specific to this movie, but I don't think I've ever seen it done before to such a stellar execution. So all that to be said, my holy moment is the fact that this movie was able to capture what felt like real life reflected on film and not simply a reproduction of a performance.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think a part of it, if I could say, that kind of relates to that, or something, a specific part that like does that for me is like it's like a few seconds of a moment of Sophie with her dad, and she's saying, I just turned 11 and my dad's 131, and then she flips the camera towards herself for just like a couple of seconds, and it just felt something like there's the I've gone through some of the work to archive a lot of my own family's home videos, and there's this one where it just reminds for me, kind of just me of myself, just jumping into. I think it was my parents were doing something within a church, and I tried to jump in front of the camera and said, like, "Hey," and it just reminded me like so much of that. So I think that just cooperating with it didn't a lot of this, if not every, all of it didn't really for me speak to as much of this like, oh, this is technically this is definitely just a performance, but it just felt very real.
That's actually crazy what you just said, because audience at home, I'm going to read you one of my 2 notes I took while watching this movie verbatim. That smile of the girl at the beginning turning the camera around and smiling looked like Caroline. And what that means is it's the exact scene and the exact moment Vega was just talking about where she's interviewing her dad. She's like, I just turned 11. My dad's 113. And she turns the camera and smiles like, haha, I'm so funny. Caroline is my younger sister. Just when she did that, I was like, I have seen that smile before. I know if my sister had a camera, that's what she would have done. And so it's just crazy that Vega just shared human experience being like that moment. It's just the fact that that moment rang true to both moments we've experienced is just phenomenal.
No, like I said right after what you're saying, I think it's beautiful, and I think that makes it more beautiful, perhaps. But I think my holy moment, personally, might lie in the scene near the end of the movie where Callum gets this like burst of energy and then like trying to drag Sophie into dancing, but not as much just for this, not as that, I guess not as much just for the scene of it, of what literally is happening. He is somewhere is gifted with this burst of energy to where there's this very fond memory that she is able to, or she could be able to have of her father. But into like how the entire scene unfolds and how it like there's some pieces of it at the beginning, there's some pieces just throughout the film where it's this like, I think, desperation that might come through on both of their ends that might be corroborated some with I think one of the best uses of this song, if not the best use of this song in any film ever, Under Pressure. And then seeing like clips of them dancing in real time in the memory. And then them at this like black void nightclub with sporadic lighting. And then that interplaying, and then her going from younger Sophie to older Sophie, and then him being dragged back, and then like the lyrics going over it being just in the spirit of reading some lyrics of some songs off. Like, it's the terror of knowing what this world is about, watching some good friends screaming, "Let me out. Pray tomorrow gets me higher, high, high. Pressure on people on streets. Turned away from it all like a blind man, sat on the fence, but it didn't work. Keep coming up with love, but it's so slashed and torn. Why? Love. Insanity laughs under pressure we're breaking. Can't we give ourselves one more chance? Can we give love one more chance? Can we give love, give love, give love, give love, give love?" And then seeing just that, I think what speaks to maybe it speaks to two things, or at least maybe it speaks to a lot of things, but I'm just going to say into the how I find it a holy moment, and to how I believe it might speak to two things. One of the things being the desperation of those lyrics going over perhaps Sophie to Callum wanting to hold on to this love that she has with her father, this idea of and this memory of her father, but then this desperation slash perhaps it's just letting go. Quite literally what happens in the scene, and what happens in more of a figurative sense of him not being able to continue, not being able to hold on, not being able to give love anymore. And he just fades. So I think all in all, that entire scene, how that plays out in so many different ways, and I could just, I think, keep on talking about that for maybe until it's like Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. But that overwhelming, all-consuming, like the feeling of like trying to hold on to something, but also having to feel like you can't just keep going, and this kind of free fall that I think happens near the end of the film, that I think it just gets so right. And it doesn't like the entire scene, that instead of it being this figurative, really beautiful thing, could have just been so much different. And I don't think it would have read nearly as impactful and nearly as, I will think about this in 5 years. I'll think about this maybe in 10 years. This will sit with me for a while, kind of thing. So I just think it was such a uniquely beautiful way of crafting that I'm so glad that Charlotte chose to do that over anything else.
Yeah, as a wise man once said, beautiful.
I could talk about this movie maybe forever, or maybe just for another week, but I'd love to continue talking about it. And if
Tune in for the next 5 episodes. We're going to continue talking about Aftersun.
Yep, pretty much until the new year. You're going to hear us.
I think we could at least do another 2-hour. I bet we could do another 2-hour episode about Aftersun.
Maybe we'll circle back on another season. Who knows? But regardless if we do hit this in another episode, or if this is where this might die for now, I would still love to continue this dialogue with anyone who might be watching. whether it be over our Instagram DMs, which I think as of right now might not have anything in it outside of like our logo and a little bio, or Facebook. Please don't reach out to us on Facebook, or at least don't reach out in regards to this because I probably won't see it. But email or our GDM, preferred mediums. I mean, you can comment too. Reach out to me individually on my Instagram or whatever you want to do. Just I would love to continue this dialogue. I think it's such a fascinating thing, and maybe you hated it, and maybe it didn't really click with you at all. But in just a general sense, I think movies like this and movies just period have such a unique way of speaking to you or not speaking to you or grabbing things out of people. I think movies have just this awesomely beautiful thing about them that either speaks to you or doesn't speak to you. Like, at least you're able to talk about it. And I would love for any of you out there, if anyone's listening, to listen and to talk to about at least specifically this movie, but all of the movies, period, that we talk about on the podcast, or the ones that we don't. But I'm really glad that if you've gotten this far into it, that you have. Well, I don't want to take too much of my co-hosts' more time, but I would really love to know, just in a really quick and easy way, what our ranking was for this movie. Well, I guess individual ranking, not our, as if this is a collective opinion that we all hold. Maybe it will be. We'll have to just find out in a little bit. But if you would like to go first, Nathaniel, what is this rating for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a first here on the Holy Moment podcast, and I'm gonna have to do a little bit of a retcon. And I thought a lot about this. I want to give this movie the Creator Adamus ranking, which is the ranking right under the Holy Moment, the highest ranking we can give. So it's a very high ranking. But the retcon I want to give is this movie is not a 1-for-1 of the movie we watched last week. Come on, come on. They're just so different in so many areas. However, some of the things I praised both movies about were similar. Just the aspects of the authenticity, the idea that they were both kind of like a collage of moments and not really doing the classical 3-act structure and doing setup and payoffs, child and parent interaction. So that there's enough tissue and cartilage of the things that I specifically liked about both movies for them to be comparable. So I want to give this movie, Aftersun, Creator Damus, and I want to move from last week, Come On, Come On, to A Drunken Monk, the rank below. I just think because, again, these major themes that I saw both having some connective tissue, I just think Aftersun did them better. And so that's what I'm going to give. I'm giving Aftersun officially Creator Damus. It is officially reaching and so close to touching holiness, and the filmmaker did such a phenomenal job. And I think honestly, what's keeping it from a holy moment from me is a little bit of the personal just bias of connecting to the movie. And I know in the past we talked about me being entertained by movies. It has nothing to do with me being entertained in this regard. It just has to do, I didn't fully, for such an emotional movie, I didn't quite fully connect with the emotions that were being portrayed through the characters, even though I loved them and thought they were done so well. So that's my ranking.
Thank you so much for that. What does our other co-host, Mr. JWN Ickles, think about it?
I'm going to give this movie a holy moment. I think this movie was firing on all cylinders for me. And again, just how real it felt. And the relationship between Sophie and Callum. Just all of the facets of the relationship that we got to see that were obscured to her when she was younger and that remained obscure as she was an adult. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's just a holy moment for me.
Nice. I think that's our first official holy moment on the podcast. Well, Grave with the Fireflies. I think some of us might have given that a holy moment.
I think I've given something a holy moment. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. All right, well, thank you so much. I think I might also have to agree with JWN on this one. I think I also would give this movie a holy moment. I just think it did so many things well in a general sense, but I really did think that in some instances and in some just overarching ways that Charlotte was able to craft this beautiful, 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 beautiful movie that it doesn't really, maybe, I guess saying it doesn't deserve anything less, but it doesn't deserve anything less, in my personal opinion, than like a holy moment because of how I interacted with it.
Both high praises, but both make sense. I mean, that's a pretty high ranking for a movie, which I think it fully deserves from all three of us.
I mean, like, if you want to cry a little bit about parenthood, watch episode 8 and watch episode 7. And before you do either of those, listen to the soundtracks. Listen to Come On, Come On, and be a little bit devastated. A little bit, like, go for a walk, smoke a cigarette, go for a walk in the sun during this time of year, which, as of recording, it's winter. Smoke a cigarette, watch the sun fall unto behind the trees. And then with this soundtrack, drink a beer and cry.
Perfect for the mental health.
Bingo. There's nothing better. But this is also that's not an endorsement to either smoke or drink, just a FYI. But that's just kind of like what it gives to me, the vibes it gives. Anywho, there's just one thing that we might need to know. I mean, outside of a few minor details at the end, but I think we kind of now need to know what movie we're watching next week.
Ooh, what movie? Jeffrey, the Hat God, the movie
All right.
man. Tell us the
Everybody give me a
news.
drum roll. Drum roll, please.
No.
Hey, fuck you.
We're unionizing against this. No more drum rolls for you, Jeffrey.
All right. I'll do a drum roll for myself.
That's a horrible drum.
I'm looking forward to this one. Akira. Very different.
Oh, yes. I'm excited about Akira. Okay, this is a movie for me. I mean, loved all these picks, Vega. Really were great. I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, I mean, that means I'm hosting for the second time. Get to redeem myself after that Muppet episode. Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. So this is the category, just for some context for our viewers. The category that I chose this movie for was cool movie posters. And of course, the Akira poster is iconic. Him on his motorbike. Yeah. But beyond that, I know nothing about this film. So this will be a moment of discovery for me. Hopefully enlightenment.
Heck yeah. I'm so excited for this movie. Have you seen it, Vega?
I'm not going to say if I have or haven't. I am going to say I think we should all dress up.
Like, as
Dress
anime
up as what?
characters? Or like as what?
Oh, I just mean the style and like so many shots from this are so
Ooh.
iconic
Oh.
that like I think we just got to like pull up. I'm bringing a motorcycle into this room. I think that's my entrance next episode.
Well, I have
Yeah,
several other
motorcycle.
jackets. I don't know if that would work. Yeah, that should work.
I'm gonna spend $5,000 getting a VTuber rig. So I'm gonna come in as a 2D animation. That's gonna be my cosplay to really get into that mindset of animation.
Well, it looks like it's that time, everyone. Where can we find us? Some places, like at minimum Spotify, Apple Music. If you're listening to us somewhere else, what's wrong with you? That's weird. I mean, YouTube, that's fine. But beyond that, that's weird. Nah, but I'm really grateful for anyone who's been listening to us today. And tell us if you liked it, tell us if you didn't. We're always open to hearing from you. And share with your friends, share with your family, share with people you don't like online, share with people you do like online, share with your crush to tell them like, oh my gosh, this is a really interesting underground movie that I think you should hear. Like these people really talk interestingly about it. And then maybe you guys watch it together. Anyways, this was the holy moment where we watched Aftersun, which is as of winter 2024 is currently available on Netflix to watch. So you should watch it. Anyways, I'm so grateful for anyone who's listened, and I hope everyone has a Merry Christmas and a very good night. Not a Christmas episode, but still. And quit.